Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the IT Business Podcast, the show for IT professionals, where we help you run your business better, smarter, and faster. This is our weekly live show brought to us by our good friends over at ThreatLocker, Zero Protection, or Zero Trust Total Control. And I thank them for being the presenting sponsor for the live show. And I just realized something, folks. We are getting close to the end of the year. How do I know that? Well, this is the last show for November because next week is going to be the Wednesday right before Thanksgiving, and I'm not going to be here. I've got to go do stuff with family, and I'm sure you do too, so there's no show next week. And then after that is December, and we've only got a handful of shows before the holiday party, so it's getting down to it. So the next time you see me after tonight will be at some point next week, but not for the live show. It'll be for the Black Friday preview, our annual Amazon live show where I will have a whole bunch of gadgets. And this year, I think it's actually going to be pretty good. We are going to be doubling down on tech gadgets you should have as an IT professional, not just things like fancy coffee makers and floor cleaners and stuff like that. We're going to focus on actual things that you should have either in your go bag or in your toolkit or in your tech room, stuff like that. Probably tech you didn't think you needed, but you do. So that is what it's going to be happening. My guest coming up is Keith Ellis, the Impossible Success Coach. He was on a show. You may think it was a long time ago because there's been a whole bunch of shows since then. He is back for a second trip, and we are coming down to the end of the shows that I recorded while at IT Nation. So we're going to start to slow down, enjoy, kick back, enjoy the holidays. So that will be happening. I don't have an actual tech story that I'm ready to share. I did have one. I had a client that we parted ways back in 2012. They reached out to me and wanted to ask my opinion and see if I would be interested in helping them again. And I wasn't quite sure about it because I can only tell you this. I don't remember exactly why we separated. It was a weird situation. They were, let me try to describe this in the best way possible. They're really a cable company, but they also sell telephones. They also dabbled in the tech space every now and then. And we went through a period where they wanted me to help them with their tech support for their customers, because they had gotten rid of the techs that they had, long story short. So even though I used them as subcontractors for my jobs, they then would use me as a subcontractor for their clients. And a couple of their clients actually reached out to me separately and said, hey, can we just work directly with you and not through them? And I had to go through this whole thing of saying, look, you're their clients. You need to work that out with them. And it actually did work out. I actually got two clients that became mine because of them. That may have been why we parted ways, but I did the right thing. I asked them to do it their way. It wasn't where I said, yeah, let's do it behind their back or whatever. But here's the crux of what happened. So I decided, yeah, I'll come and take a look at your network and see if we want to join forces again. They also asked me to kind of go over their agreement that they had with their current provider. And what it was a MSP that got purchased or rolled up into one of the, shall we say, national MSPs. I'm not going to say the name. You know them. They are quite prominent. And it's one that gets talked about a lot. And I was like, interesting. And they had me looking at the pricing that they were giving them. And they had literally lined item out all of the stuff. It wasn't like they did, here's your monthly price, here's your basic support, here's your cybersecurity. They literally listed the stack items in there. And I found that quite interesting. And I realized that, you know what, this is not going to be for me. So I actually gave him my 3-tier quote for basic support, cyber support, and then a complete package with on-site service. I do not expect to hear from them, but that was quite interesting. If I ever get to the point where I can talk about that confidently, I know some of you will ask me, who was it? I'm not going to tell you, but that was interesting. I also was going to talk about yesterday when everybody was having the Cloudflare issues. I actually had come across another podcast with the title, "It's Not Your Fault to Fix the Internet." And I thought, how timely is that? And I started to go through the podcast and listen to it, and it had nothing to do with Cloudflare. It had nothing to do with DNS in particular. It talked about the concept of enshittification, and that's the word they use, folks. It was analyzing how major platforms like Facebook, Amazon, and Google have become less user-friendly while prioritizing monetization and monopoly power. And that, of course, we all know that. They also talked about the structural problems of the internet and why the burden of fixing these issues should not fall on everyday users, but rather on policy changes and collective action. So I thought it was going to be interesting. I thought, ooh, that'd be a cool title. Maybe I'd steal it, but I'm not going to. But how does that correspond with the Cloudflare outage yesterday? Well, it's basically talks about the idea of the consolidation of critical infrastructure into monopolistic platforms makes the internet fragile and exposes users to systemic risk. There's a whole bunch of things we could probably talk about that. But the biggest thing is I, like many of you, I don't know, well, shouldn't say many of you. I'm going to assume that some of you, like me, alerted users to say, hey, there could be a problem with some of your websites. There's an issue. Don't call me because it ain't me, because, you know, that's what users do. Hey, I can't get to this website. Can you unblock it or whatever? So I remember one of the users actually wrote back and said, oh, thanks for letting us know. What can we expect? I'm like, you can expect nothing, at least from me. When it's up, it's up. I did do a little more research, and I found out that Cloudflare protects and routes traffic for about 20% of all websites. So while it felt like a big outage, kind of like those old AWS ones and stuff, 20%, not that big, but it felt big. But it also reiterates the issue that a single configuration bug or failure impacts a massive number of businesses and consumers and reveals the risk of centralization. So that is that. But basically, I'll put a link into that podcast and some of the other stuff that I researched about Cloudflare, because I think it's a good thing to give to users, letting them know internet's not our fault. We didn't build it. We can't help you. Just stop watching porn and we'll all be good. All right, let's go ahead and move on with the show. I've got the guest sitting in the green room here, so let me bring him up. I mentioned him early, Keith Ellis, the Impossible Success Coach, a best-selling author and business coach, helping entrepreneurs and business owners achieve goals they believe to be impossible. Keith, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Marv. Delighted to be here.
All right. So since our last show, anything impossible happened to you?
Well, I did get kicked off a website, a web conference from the Cloudflare thing. But other than that, that wasn't impossible. That was quite possible.
Oh, yeah. Very possible. Hopefully it wasn't a big client, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Okay. All right, Keith, let me, I probably should have brought up a chat. I see we've got a couple of people out there, and I always encourage listeners and watchers that if you have a question or a comment while we're doing the show here, throw it in there and we will address them as they come up. But to talk about a quick recap of our show last time, we talked about, of course, best practices versus differentiation, committing to impossible goals. And I think one of the concepts that really stood out to me was you talking about the transformative power of pursuing goals that seem personally out of reach, but how the mental shift could accelerate innovation and stuff. So that stood out to me. The best practice we'll get to in a minute, because that got to a couple of listeners and stuff, but the mental side of it really struck out to me. What can you say to kind of, add more to that conversation?
Sure. So my business as a coach is to help entrepreneurs set and achieve impossible goals. And what I mean by impossible is not something that violates the laws of the physical universe. I'm not talking about being in two places at the same time, or going faster than the speed of light, or the Browns winning the Super Bowl. I'm not talking about something that's physically impossible. Sorry, I know that's near and dear to your heart. But I'm talking about what's impossible here, right between your ears. And we all have ideas of what we can do, and we have ideas of what we can't do. We've learned these things through the years. They're called limiting beliefs. And psychologists, there's a lot of literature about this. We've all, if you've ever been to a motivational or a self-help course or read a book, you've learned about how to try to overcome your limiting beliefs. And I think that's really hard to do, because they're deeply programmed. And when you try to go after them directly, they essentially dig in deeper. And what I do is I say, look, stop fighting that battle. Just say, this thing that I want to do, I really, really want to do this. I believe it's impossible for me. It's beyond my capability. I'm not pretending it isn't. I'm not pretending it's possible. I just want it enough that I'm willing to commit to it. And if you can take that step to commit to something that you genuinely believe is impossible for you, then your brain flips a switch, goes to a whole nother level, because before, your brain never entertained that. Because it knew that you knew that it was impossible. So it never, it never lets you even think about it. But if you suddenly start thinking about it and you commit to it and say, I'm going to make this happen, come hell or high water, your brain goes, this guy's serious. We better get with the program.
Right.
And it starts trying to give you information and answers to help you get where you want to go. It's an absolutely transformational moment. But you can't, it's one of those things you can't talk about really, because it doesn't compute, right? How do I understand what that is unless I've experienced it? But if there's something you want so much, and the classic example I give, I work with entrepreneurs, a lot of people say, I want to scale my business dramatically, say 300%, right? But I'm already tapped out. I love my business. I love what I do. I love my customers, but I'm largely the product here. And I've got no more time to give it. I've got no more emotional content to give it. I've got no more energy to give it, but I want to keep scaling. I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. And I call that success prison. You're a victim of your own success. And the way around that is to commit to an impossible goal, something you believe is impossible, and then suddenly your brain will start making it happen. And there's, we can talk about how that happens in the various stages and stuff like that. But in a nutshell, that's what I mean by committing to and then achieving the impossible.
All right. So while you were talking there, and you mentioned motivational speakers, and I'm going to take a little side course here. Do you watch football?
I love football.
What do you think of the Mannings?
They are, well, now they're charming. And his Peyton's piece on motivation just cracks me up.
That's exactly where I was going.
So tongue in cheek and so brilliantly done. I mean, the guy's a stand-up comic.
Yeah,
he really is good.
So I was going to go there exactly, because yes, he, of course, it's a brilliant commercial. And but part of me listens to him do that. And, of course, I'm not going to call any names out, but we know a lot of those types of motivational speakers. We have some people in our industry that kind of, I don't want to say mimic them, but they do the same type of, presentation and stuff. And it's all about, like what you said, belief that you can do it. And sometimes it feels rah, but how do you go from that rah, yes, I'm committed, yes, I believe, to actually making it, boots on the ground, ready to go?
Well, that's a great question. And I'm when I do a speaking engagement, I'm generally introduced as a motivational speaker, but I don't know how to motivate people. I'd make a lousy football coach, presumably. I don't know how to motivate people, but I do know how to get them to do what they want to do. Now, that seems like a fine distinction there, but it's huge. I was in sales for many years with high-tech companies, startups and large companies. And I never, people, the joke in sales is, this guy, a really good salesperson, and I was a pretty good salesperson, can sell ice to an Eskimo, right? That never made any sense to me. Why would you sell ice to an Eskimo? He doesn't need it. He doesn't want it, right? I don't know how to sell somebody something they don't want. Never figured that out. Never wanted to figure that out. I know how to sell them something they want. And the same is true with what I teach in terms of impossible goals. I don't know how to convince somebody to want something that they don't want. I just can't do it. But my point, this is why I said earlier, it's really hard to get this if you haven't experienced it. Once you commit to the impossible, once you say, I want this, I'm willing to pay the price to make this happen. I don't even know what the price is. It's beyond me. I know that. Don't know how I'm going to get there, but I'm going to commit to making this happen. Now, the weird thing is we do this in our early years. We do this automatically. I call it the impossibility instinct. It's programmed into us. I mean, when you were, let's say 9 months old, you were crawling around and you kept trying to get up and walk. Guaranteed. I did the same thing everybody does. And you keep trying it. You are physically incapable of doing it, emotionally incapable, psychologically incapable of walking. But by God, you're going to walk. And you do. And then you do the same. And then you start running, as every parent knows. First you're crawling, then you're walking, and then you're, oh my God, this kid's running around. I can't keep up with him. But you do the same thing when you learn to read, or you learn to write, or you learn to ride a bike, you learn to drive a car. These are things that happen sort of as rites of passage. We just kind of assume they're going to happen, and something that was impossible for us suddenly becomes easy. And we do it over and over and over again, and then we forget about it. We forget we did that. We forget that process because we get to the point where it doesn't happen as a rite of passage. It has to be a conscious decision. But the same instinct is in there. The same process works. You just have to pull it out and say, okay, I can't do this. I am incapable of doing this, but I want it so much, I'm going to commit to it. And when you do that, that's when that switch flips. And that's when you start solving problems that you never even entertained because you weren't willing to consider them.
All right. So I'm going to shift gears here because I want to get this out of the way. I've been sitting on this. I had a listener write in and ask this question, and it was exactly the topic that we thought it was going to be. And it was addressed to me to ask you. You say best practices are just average past practices once everybody's doing them, but our industry thrives on standards for client trust, insurance, and compliance. How can MSPs or consultants actually ditch these practices without risking their reputation or opening themselves up to liability?
That's a terrific question, especially coming from folks in your industry. And nowhere in my comments did I say you should ditch standards. What I said is you should ditch best practices. And the way best practices typically get promoted in the business world, and tech is different, and we'll get to that in a second. But the way that best practices get promoted is, we're going to do this cool new thing, and if you dig a little bit below the surface, you find out, well, why are we doing that? Well, because I learned about this at a management training seminar. Well, where'd they get it? Well, they got it because all these other companies are doing it. So it's something that was novel. We aren't doing it yet. It rises to the top. We label it best practices, and suddenly everybody's doing the same thing, which means it's not best anymore. It's average. Now, in the tech world, When you talk about standards, that's something entirely different. For one thing, you have to commit to and achieve standards to be considered real. For one thing, you can't dodge any legal liability in the tech world if you aren't meeting certain standards and you come up to this level. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about if you're meeting standards and you're doing everything you're supposed to do that is required of you by these standards, by your lawyers. What differentiates you in the marketplace? How are you different? And this is where best practices are like shooting yourself in the foot, because the mindset that says we're going to do best practices to differentiate ourselves in the marketplace completely misses the point. You can't be doing what everybody else is doing. You can't act like they act. You have to come up with an additional unique value that you offer, can still be standards based, that you offer that nobody else offers. That's what I'm talking about. Otherwise, what you get is, and I've seen this over and over and over again, you get 20 relatively small competitors in a space. Maybe they're 500,000 to 2 million a year revenue. And largely, the founder is the product, especially in the consulting space. And what they're trying to do, they're all trying to be like the other guy. They're all trying to be as good as the other guy. And the customer looks at them and says, why would I choose one of you over the other? And my point is, don't try to be like the other guy. Yes, meet your standards. Yes, do the technical requirements that are expected of you. Absolutely, that's a given. But how do you differentiate yourself? And it's not going to be best practices that differentiate you. Right. They aren't best, they're worst in that case.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Is that a reasonable answer?
Yeah, it makes sense. I want to also throw in a component that I wanted to ask you about the tech sector versus others, because while we're trying to hold ourselves up to these standards, whether they're best practice or not, we talk about, wanting to be professional. We talk about all of these things. We ask vendors to help us. They're the ones who kind of helped us put together these best practices based on the software and the tools that we use. But in the same coin, we never educated our customers, and they're still judging us based on price and commoditization. So in a sense, some people like to say, well, if you're doing best practices, you're going to be charging, this much, and you're going to be up here. If you're not, you're going to be charging this. So, you obviously can't be a managed service provider or doing best practices and stuff. But yet, I will say this, I don't know how much you were listening in my monologue there, but the old customer that I went to go see was dealing with a very large MSP that supposedly is a best practice company, and their rates were rock bottom. I mean, there was no way I was going to match that price. And I mean, the perception is, well, if the big boys can charge that little, everybody should be able to charge that little.
That's a whole nother, pricing is a whole nother discussion. And we could get into that and spend considerable time on that. But let's just deal with exactly what you're talking about. This idea of best practices in that context. Take ISO certification, for example, at whatever level it's relevant to your practice. You have it, right? Your competitors have it.
Right.
If they don't have it, that's a differentiator. Okay, that's good for you. That's wonderful. But the chances are, if they want to compete in the same marketplace you're competing, they got to get it too. Okay, maybe several of them. And maybe that's just one piece. There are Microsoft certifications, all kinds of other things that are certifications. So you get all that stuff. And now what do you have? You have what everybody else has. So what you don't want to do is be evaluated on commoditization and price. But if you haven't successfully demonstrated yourself, if you've been focused entirely on standards, right? Best practices, whatever you want to call them, instead of focusing also on differentiation, then you give your customer no ammunition to choose you over the competition, except what they're used to doing, which is price. So what you want to do is get out of the price conversation entirely and offer your customers something they can't get from someone else. So they're not asking about price anymore. I mean, price will ultimately matter in the sense it's got to fit into a budget and stuff like that. But if you're offering more, there's a little piece of their brain that says, well, of course they're going to charge more for that, right? Because they're offering more. And if they want it, because you've communicated the value to them, and it has to be valuable to them. Again, don't ask me to help you try to talk somebody into something they don't want. I can't do that.
Right.
But if they care about, take for example, security, right? If they care about security, and there are all these standards, best practices for security, and you check all the boxes as your competitors do, what else can you do for them? I mean, that's a valid question to ask yourself. What else can I do to help these guys sleep at night that my competitors are not doing? And if you come up with something and an honest, plausible, compelling story, you can charge more for that because you're offering this additional service. That's what I'm talking about. Focus on the differentiation in addition to the substrate of all the certifications and standards you have to have. Now, I say tech is different. You can make the same argument for lawyers, for accountants, for financial services advisors. They all have regulations that they have to adhere to. They have to do certain things in a certain way. That's a given. Don't talk about best practices. None of that's best practices. It's average practices. Those guys, to win in their environment, have to do the same thing I was suggesting in your environment, which is differentiate. What can you do that's beyond those standards that your other guys, most of your competitors will be simply too lazy to do? And that's how you win.
So in the legal industry, they're able to kind of have a scorecard. And that's from my buddy Tim there in the chat who said hello there. Hey, Tim. There's a scorecard of wins and losses for attorneys where they can say, yeah, we win cases, our opponents don't. We don't have that in tech. Right. The closest thing we can say is, we protect our customers. We've never had a breach. We've never lost a bit of data. However we can say it. We always have that trouble with trying to figure out what's going to differentiate us. Is it white glove service? Is it that we will, try to resolve every call on the first call, that sort of thing. So it's always interesting.
Can I offer something?
Yeah.
One part of my practice is what I call magic questions, which is questions that you ask yourself. And if you ask the right question in the right way at the right time, you can transform your life and your business at the speed of thought. So one useful question for everybody in your audience to ask is, what does my customer want from me that I'm not giving them yet? If you don't have an answer to that, that's a great place to start. And you can ask yourself that 5 times a year if you want, because it's a changing marketplace. It's changing backdrop, changing technologies, circumstances, et cetera. But that's a great place to start because most of us, it's too easy to get into our own mind because that's where we live, right? So when I'm dealing with customers, what I think about when I'm creating a coaching program or a online training program or even delivering a speech, it's always, what do I want? What is the outcome I want for my customer based on what they want for themselves? So it starts with, what do they want? What do they want to get out of this, whatever this is? And how can I give that to them? And if we get in that spot, chances are really small that your competitors are asking that question in a meaningful way. They're too busy running around doing the standard stuff and leaving it at that. They think they got all their ducks in a row if they've got all those boxes checked, and they don't.
Right.
And so that's really what I'm talking about.
So actually, Tim did ask a question, but before we get to his question, I want to ask you this in a sense. The thing you said about, what do they want from me that I'm not giving them? So a while back, and I don't know how many years ago, one of the questions that I learned to ask of my current customers, basically in a way to keep them, was to ask them, why did you choose us to begin with? and why have you stayed with us over all these years? That seems backwards from the way that you asked the question, but that was the way I was taught to ask it. Does that play any part in there, or should I really be asking it? Can I ask them your question in an appropriate way?
It's a different question. So it's absolutely important, and you absolutely should ask it, but you'll elicit different answers. So for example, you could find, especially a corporate customer, if they're being honest with you, could say something as simple as, we've stayed with you because it's too tough to change. It's more hassle than it's worth. That's really them saying you're a commodity. We don't want to switch to another commodity because it's not worth it. Now, you may also get a great answer, very valuable answer. We stayed with you because you're the only guys who do X, right? That's a wonderful thing to hear. So that's why I say it's an absolutely worthwhile question. I'm approaching it differently. I'm saying, what are your customers not telling you? Or what are you not hearing? You can play that any way you want. Both of those are valid questions, by the way. What am I not hearing that my customers are trying to communicate? And what are my customers not telling me? But the simplest way to approach it is, what do they want from me, from somebody in my position that I'm not giving them? You can also broaden it. You can say, what do they want from me? From what do they want from somebody in this area, in this space, in this broader space that we aren't yet giving them? And you might find that if you couple this service that isn't customary in your world with this service, with something that is, you have something new under the sun. And now you have a great story to tell. You have customers who say, oh, wow, we're now getting this from you. We can't get it from anybody else. We want to stick with you. So it's a classic brainstorming question, but it's a question about that you ask yourself. You're really not asking your customer at this stage. I know it sounds strange. This is your view of the marketplace. And by the way, you don't have to limit yourself to asking yourself these days. You can go to an AI, to Chat or to Perplexity or to Gemini or any of them, right? Claude, and say, I'm a MSP selling to whatever financial services, right? Whatever your piece of the world is. What do my customers want from me that they aren't telling me? Or what are what keeps my customers up late at night? Any number of ways to do that. And you might surface some things you hadn't thought about. You might, and with AI doesn't care how much work you give it, right? So you can say, give me 50 of these, right? Normally if you're talking to a human being, it's like, well, give me 3 or 4. Give me 50 of them. And AI, just because of the way it works and the way large language models work, often doesn't get to the good stuff until you're halfway down the list. And then suddenly you go, bang, that's exactly what I hadn't even thought of that before. And it's just, it's doing a lot of processing. It's just putting some stuff together, and suddenly it's essentially inside its world, it's throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. And if something good sticks and it surfaces it for you, that could be very useful. It's not as useful to me as asking yourself, but, don't sell it short. The AI is a fascinating technology to me for 2 reasons. It is terrible. It can't answer any questions that really matter. And we can talk about this at length if you want. It can't answer any of the questions that really matter to us as a human being. It can't tell you what your favorite flavor of ice cream is, right? It can't do anything that simple, but it can come up with some very interesting questions that you can ask yourself. So it can't answer questions, but it can source questions, if that makes sense. I love the irony.
Okay. So skipping over Tim's question, because he right in the middle of what we were talking about, he said, you talked about, what keeps you up at night. He said, instead of asking what keeps you up, flip it. Why do you get out of bed in the morning? What motivates you to get out of bed and do the thing you do and make the widget you make? Protect that. I was
totally agree with that.
Yeah. And then I was thinking of, you were asking, the question about, what are the customers, getting from you that they can't get from other. One of the things that I found that has worked is trying to get into those conversations with the business owners, decision makers, or whatever, and finding out what they're seeking that they may not think to ask you. I mean, years ago, the IT department didn't do the phones. They would go out and find their own phone provider. They would go out and find, their own internet. They would just call up the internet company on their own before calling us. Now, at least most of my customers, anything that they want to do, they at least call me and say, hey, do you do this or do you know somebody? So that's a way to get in there, in my opinion, is to have them call you first. And if you have to direct them somewhere else, that's fine. At least you gave them the direction and they think, well, you push me in the right direction. I'll be sure to come back to you next time.
Yep.
So
that's because you're in a position where they know you, like you, and trust you.
Right.
That's where you want to be. Right.
Yeah. I do want to come back to Tim's earlier question, but I know that that's going to kind of take us down a different road. So I want to make sure that I thank my sponsors here. So let me grab my sheet here and just do a quick shout out. Our show is presented by ThreatLocker. ThreatLocker unifies security policies, letting you monitor every app, script, and file with complete audit transparency, backed by 24/7 cyber hero support and easy policy management. You always have expert help and peace of mind. And if you're watching the screen there, check out our page, itbusinesspodcast.com/sponsors, and support those other people that support us on the show. And thank you to our patrons that also help to pay the bills. So let me go back to the comments here. And I didn't know how to transition to this, but Tim asked, hey, Keith, what makes a good differentiator for an MSP?
So I'm one of those maddening coaches. I don't have the answers. I have the questions. So here's a question that is going to come completely out of left field.
Okay.
And that's the question Tim just asked, except he asks it of himself, right? So Tim, ask yourself that. And when you ask yourself that, in other words, what could differentiate me as an MSP, right? When you ask yourself that, here I have what's called the magic process. It's for asking questions in a certain way. I call them magic questions. So of course there's an acronym associated with it. But the first step is you need to insert yourself in the question. It's a first person question. You're asking yourself this. You're not reading it off the page saying, what do you want to do? You're saying, what do I want to do? Insert yourself in the question and then ask it out loud. This is one of those things that it's the simplest thing in the world, and nobody will do it because they're embarrassed or whether they think it's silly. Ask it out loud, and while you're at it, stand up. Get your whole body into it, because the brain and the body are constantly in communication. I'm not getting in a bunch of woo-woo stuff here. I'm talking about solid, hardcore science. They're always communicating. And if you can get your body involved in a question, by speaking it out loud and hearing it as a question, and by actually standing up, you actually dig deeper into your mind to get answers. So ask it out loud, ask it standing up, and then here's the trick: capture everything you come up with. We all have this tendency. I'm not going to say you have it. I have it. That's why I learned to get around this. We tend to dismiss, we tend to censor ourselves. It's like those limiting beliefs, right? So you ask yourself a question, what would differentiate me? And you say, well, this would make me, oh, no, I can't do that. Never mind. Well, maybe, I can't do it. Never mind. Write everything down. Write down the silly ideas. Write down the stupid ideas. Write down the impossible ideas. That's where your gold is. And then afterwards, you can edit. Afterwards, you can evaluate. But when you ask yourself a question, you want your mind to open, not close. And if you stop listening to yourself, this is just the way the human mind works. Again, it's science-based. If you stop listening to yourself, your mind will go, okay, he's not really serious about this. I got nothing. And it'll just, go on thinking about football scores or something. So when you ask yourself a question, listen to all the answers. And by the way, the answers may well come, some additional answers may come 2 hours from now, or even 2 days or 2 weeks from now, or in the shower, or when you're taking a walk. That's the way the brain works. A question is virtually impossible for the brain to ignore. Let me give you an example. Everybody put your listening ears on. All right, here's a question. What color are your mother's eyes? Now, I guarantee you that nobody in your audience could ignore that question. You might say, I don't want to go there. You might have a problem with your mother. Your mother might have passed, you whatever. But I guarantee you can't ignore that question. And your brain, even if you fight it, your brain is going to try to answer that question. And it'll keep digging until it comes up with it. By the way, this is a vector, but I got to tell you this. When I first heard this question, I didn't know the answer.
I was going to ask, what if you don't know?
I didn't know the color of my own mother's eyes. Fortunately, she was still with us, and I could go and find out. And I was like, hi, Mom, and I'm doing this stuff, checking it out, making certain. But I knew her face, I knew her expression, I knew everything else, but I couldn't answer that question. And that really bothered me. But I also realized that how powerful questions were, because I couldn't let it go until I got that answer. Anyway, so that's just, Tim, not to put you on the spot, but it's a question you should be asking yourself. It's a great question. It's an incredibly powerful question. Ask it tomorrow. Ask it the next day. You'll come up with different answers. But it's a great question.
Yeah. So the exercise, what I would call an exercise, when you say, ask those questions and throw up every answer and don't dismiss them. Is there a function of when you put everything up there and instead of dismissing it, asking the question in a way as, okay, I put that up there. Why can't I do that? I mean, is that a good exercise to do to kind of figure out the next step after putting those up there? Just putting them up there doesn't mean much.
No, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish with that question. So you could ask, why can't I do that? You could also ask, what is the value of that to my customer? Because it's another thing that happens in the marketing sales world is, and I don't coach marketing, but I'm deeply passionate about it and have spent my career in it, marketing and sales. So whatever I do with my clients, it's full of marketing stuff, just because that's how my brain works. And because that's the primary problem every business has to solve. If you can't get new customers, paying customers, you go out of business. It's that simple. And so my brain focuses on that. But if you're questioning and your mission and your plan is all about how to get something of value for your customer, everything should circle back to that. And it's so easy for us in the sales world, the marketing world, to get focused on what we do, on features, right? Oh, I have ISO XXX certification. What does that mean to the customer, right? You have it. That's a feature to them. If they don't know what that means and how incredibly valuable it is to them, then your job is to educate them, right? And here's one of the really interesting things about how the human brain works. If you have this thing, and again, I'm just using ISO certification as one example. If you have this thing and all of your competitors also have it, but you're the guy who explains it to your customer and explains why this is so important, guess who wins that battle? Guess who has differentiated himself in front of his customer? Because you've given your customer something of value. You're not trying to talk them into it. You're trying to explain, we went through all kinds of crap, jumping hoops and paying money and doing all this stuff to get ourselves and our facilities and our practices and our people certified with this little number here. And here's why we did all that for you. And if you're the person who tells that story, you win. Even though everybody else in your space has the same cert.
It makes it very simple. I mean, we hear a lot of times where customers will say, well, you're the only one that would talk to me, and not make me feel stupid or not talk down to me, sort of a thing.
Yeah, that's believe me. I've been in technology my entire career. I love it. I'm fascinated with it. I totally geek out, and I'm not a technologist. I started programming with punch cards, right? And I realized this probably isn't my strength. But if I'm dealing with somebody who is a technologist and they're teaching me something arcane, and they do it in a way that doesn't make me feel stupid, I like them a whole lot. What a simple, easy thing to do to enhance a relationship. And ultimately, that's the differentiation you want. You want them to know you, to like you, and to trust you. And if you get there first, you're hard to dislodge. Because everybody else is going to come in there talking about features and all this. We do all these wonderful things, and that's not what the client cares about. Client cares about dealing with somebody who doesn't make him feel stupid, who makes him feel secure, who helps him sleep at night, right? And none of those are technology based. They're all human to human based.
Very interesting. Let me switch gears here and ask another question that came in, and it was actually addressing your success prison trap, since most of us who are technicians fall into that. And the question reads, most of us who started MSPs or started our MSP did it for freedom and autonomy, but now we're busier than ever. What 2 to 3 actionable steps would you actually recommend for breaking out of the trap instead of just grinding harder or hiring endlessly? I don't know what the hiring endlessly means.
You could almost lift this from one of my web pages. It's a great question.
Okay.
Because the niche I work with are entrepreneurs. They aren't necessarily tech entrepreneurs. They can be. They can be legal and financial service and all these other places. They are typically the product. That's really what your guy is saying. I'm still the product. I'm selling me. Even if I got a team, I'm selling this wonderful service that I created when I started my company. And that means they're not scalable. So not only are they running hard and putting themselves away wet every night, but they want to grow, because as entrepreneurs, we want to do that. We just know that's how you survive, right? You keep getting larger and more successful and have more profit. And, but if you're already pedal to the metal, redlining, you can't do it. So that's really what he's expressing. I call that success prison. Other people call it, Alex Hermosi calls it the swamp. Entrepreneurs of a certain size get into this thing where they can't really grow beyond it because they're running as hard as they can just to stay where they are, which is successful. And the irony of what your friend just shared with us is that they're successful, that they're making money. They started this business to have freedom. They've succeeded in their business, but they don't have freedom. They have less freedom. They check their emails when they're on vacation. They miss dinners at home. They miss soccer practices, and all this. Yeah. It's maddening, but it's the game they've chosen. So, actionable steps. You ready for this? Set an impossible goal. That's the first actionable step. And here's why. Everybody, I'm sure, in this call has heard about the 80-20 principle, right? The 80-20 rule, Pareto's law. 80% of your activities produce 20% of your results. 20% of your activities produce 80% of your results. This is a real thing. It's something that the numbers may vary from area to area, but it's really true. This happens over and over and over again. And here's my problem with it. And it drove me nuts because I got tired of hearing this. The 80-20 rule, that's how you solve all your business problems. The 80-20 rule is not predictive. It looks backwards. It says, okay, here's the data. Here's what we did in the past. here are the things that 80% of what we did produced 20% of our results. We can measure that. We know that. What do you do tomorrow? What do you do going forward? How do you know in advance? Because who would waste their time on the 80% that's a waste of time if they knew it was a waste of time, right? I mean, think about that. You wouldn't do that. So if you know that 80% of what you're going to do tomorrow is a waste of time, don't do that. This is not hard. Don't do that. Figure out the 20% that is going to give you most of your results and do those things. So that's the actionable step for this person, right? But how do you figure that out in advance? And the answer is an impossible goal. And here's why. Let's say your objective for your business is to grow your business by 30% this year. That's a hefty number, and call the growth anything you want. Growth to the gross revenue or growth to the profit or both, whatever. But you want to grow it by 30%. So how many things, what things are available to you to accomplish that? And if you do your homework, you'll come up with probably hundreds of things you could do. Hundreds. Sell better, market better, extract more revenue from your customers, find new customers. There are all kinds of things you can do. You don't know what's the best thing for you to do because you don't have enough time to properly evaluate all your options. It's impossible. So what you do is you may hire a consultant, you may hire a coach, you may hire specialists, you might have a committee or a meeting. But in the end, what you do is you essentially pick a couple of things from this long list and you say, we're going to do those. And by God, you hope you're right. You throw the dice and you hope you're right. When you commit to an impossible goal, your focus shrinks. So let's say it's not to grow your business by 30%. It's to grow it by 300%. How do you do that? And the answer is, oh my God, there are 1,000 things that will grow it by 30%, but I can only think of like one or two things that'll grow it by 300% or 1,000%, fill in the blank. But when you get to that level of thinking, that's why you need to commit to this impossible goal first. When you commit to it, your brain suddenly says, okay, so there are like two things to think about. You think about it, you figure out, okay, this is what we're going to do. Now the 80%'s gone. This is how you get rid of the 80%, by focusing on such an audacious goal, you believe it's impossible. And that essentially clears your mind, it's like taking all the crap in your desk and pushing it into the wastebasket and focusing on the things that'll really move the needle in your business. That's how you do it. So that's the first actionable step. Set an impossible.
Okay. That alone should make somebody work. I don't want to say extra hard, but that's a lot of work to do that.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the dirty little secret of setting an impossible goal. And nobody's going to believe me when they hear this, but what can I say? When you commit to an impossible goal, it's actually easier than what you're doing now. That's why I went into that whole spiel about the 80-20 rule. Remember, you've simplified your life. You've just taken 80% of the crap on your desk and thrown it into the trash can. Your life is easier now. It's easier to achieve impossible success than it is to achieve incremental success. That sounds crazy. It sounds impossible, but that's why it works.
You've cleared a path. You know where you're going, right? Okay.
That's exactly it.
All right. So we're going to run out of time here, but earlier when we were talking about the questions and how to ask them, I was going to ask you if this was kind of the crux of your book, Magic Questions 2.0. Because when I looked it up and stuff, I remember that the idea was to teach you prompt engineering for your brain. Did I get that right?
You got that right.
Okay.
So that's a book that's about questions. That touches on the magic questions that we were talking about earlier. There's also a book that I've got out called Work Less, Scale Faster. It's about 60 pages. It's free. And if you don't mind a shameless plug, if you go to keithellis.com, you can put in your name and email address and get a free copy. And that takes you through the impossible part of it. You can also get, and I think there's a link in the book to get the Magic Questions book, but the impossible goal piece is such a departure for most people. Most people are pretty used to asking themselves questions. Yeah, there's some tweaks, and there are all kinds of questions. There are like 400 questions in that book. So that's useful in and of itself. But the impossible goal tends to be a real stretch for people. And it's because they think it's harder than what they're doing now. They think, I gave the example 30% growth versus 300% growth. Nobody can work 10 times harder. Right? Nobody has 10 times more time. So they automatically dismiss it as, oh, that's beyond me. And what I'm saying is just the opposite. I'm saying if you committed to the bigger goal, your life would simplify. It would actually be easier. That's what's explained in this book called Work Less, Scale Faster.
All right. Just trying to look and see if I had something else there, but I think that will do it. So, Keith, thank you very much, and thank you for indulging us, especially when it comes to the best practices discussion, because I knew that would resonate with the listeners here, because that's what we get drilled in our head about.
It's great, and these are great questions. You've got a wonderful audience.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and Keith has already mentioned where you can go to find him, keithellis.com. We had a link in the previous podcast show notes about the 10 magic questions. If you can find that as well, I'll put that in there again, that you can go and do that. And we'll have to get links to the Work Less, Scale Faster, you said, is free.
Yep.
And then the Magic Questions 2.0, is that available on the Amazon?
That's on Amazon. Yep.
Okay. So we'll put a link to that. And I appreciate your indulgence. Thank you very much.
Delighted to be here. Thank you, man.
All right, folks. Thank you, sir. That's going to do it for this episode. I already told everybody there's no live show next Wednesday night, but I will be back with a Black Friday preview. I don't know when yet, but it should be fantastic. Tech tools you should have, but probably don't. And then we'll start getting into the holiday shows. And yes, you heard me say that with an S. Holiday shows. We are working good on that. So thank you all, folks, for tuning in, for watching, subscribing, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys here again. Until next time, holla.